much to his dismay sometimes. So I also want to make sure to invite you to join our museum if you would like to. There are membership materials downstairs on the desk where you sign in. If you did not sign in, please do so. There is a sign-in sheet up here. It really does help us when we are writing grants to know how many visitors we have and where they're from. So please tell us where you're from. You don't have to give us your Social Security card or anything like that. If you want to receive information via your email, you can provide your email address too. We do not sell it to anyone. We're very privacy-oriented here. Pretty soon we'll be announcing a matching challenge grant soon. Please consider donating to the generous grant so that the generous grant will be doubled. On Thursday, November the 14th, Durant will be back with us at our Ann Pamela Cunningham Garden Club of Rosemont. And he's going to be talking about the gardens of Rosemont. And on that night, the Lawrence District Genealogy Society will be meeting. Is there anything you want me to say about that, Sarah Jane?
This coming Thursday, we'll have Hill and Moss family. Andrew Staten will be the speaker.
Andrew Staten will be the speaker at the Genealogy Society meeting at 7 o'clock that night, and it will be on the Hill and Ross family. On Friday and Saturday, November 29th and 30th, we will have our Mary Market craft sale here. We have lots of crafters that come in. We invite you to join us. And we're also delighted that the Headland Butler chapter of the DAR is here with us tonight. They will be presenting an award after Durant's presentation, and they have graciously provided refreshments for us, so thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to Durant.
I appreciate that. I do want to mention a couple of events that I have lined up. For one, this coming Thursday night, I'm going to be speaking at the Pickens County Museum. And this event is sponsored by the Pickens County 250 Committee. And I'm going to be discussing the role of Pickens and Oconee counties in the Revolutionary War. And I'm going to be focusing on the life and times of Andrew Pickens, and also the First Cherokee War, which is during the French and Indian War, and the Second Cherokee War, which did occur during the Revolutionary War. And then I want to invite everybody to go on a field trip, a battlefield walk, to the sites that I am going to be describing on Thursday night. Now, I don't mind telling you, this is the most fun part of anything I do when I go to these battlefields. And we walk in the footsteps of heroes, folks. And it's the kind of places where you get goosebumps when you're there. So I would love for everybody to join us. We're going to meet at the Old Stone Church, which is Andrew Pickens' burial site on the Clemson campus at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. So hope to have everybody there. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you. So tonight, I want to talk about the most famous South Carolinian ever. And I think y'all know who I'm talking about. Francis Marion. And we really are honored to be able to claim Francis Marion as our own. So, just a little bit about, the life story of Francis Marion. You can see this lovely drawing picture of him. I can tell you, folks, Francis Marion didn't look like that. Francis Marion was 5 feet 2 inches tall, and he was 110 pounds, and he had knocked knees, and he had a hook nose. He was described as a 45-year-old man stuffed into the body of a 14-year-old. So the other thing is, and we'll talk a little bit about this, he suffered a terrible broken ankle in and his ankle was broken so badly that he had to leave his service in the Continental Army and go home for recuperation. And that ankle never did heal. And with all the other characteristics he had, 5'2", 110 pounds, he walked with a horrible, pronounced limp for the rest of his life. But Francis Marion had black eyes. And when you looked into the eyes of Francis Marion, you knew you were looking into the eyes of a leader of men. He was a Huguenot. His father was a Huguenot. He was a planter. At the age of 25, he and Andrew Pickens joined forces with the British colonial provincial corps in the French and Indian War. In 1761, he joined James Grant's expedition into the Cherokee Territory. And this was an absolute massacre, folks. All the Cherokee towns in South Carolina, in Pickens and Oconee counties, were burned to the ground at this time. And Francis Marion was on this expedition, this excursion. But we have no first-person account of what he did during the French and Indian War. We do know that he gained a lot of experience, and he knew what it was like to fight in the Cherokee way. They had a very distinctive, different pattern of fighting from what the Europeans did. Their primary goal was the ambush. And if you were going through Cherokee territory, you never knew when that ambush was going to occur. You had to be constantly on your guard. You had to travel at half speed because you're always looking. You're sending your scouts out. You've always got to worry about that ambush. And with the Cherokee way of fighting, once they hit that initial blip, that was their victory. And they didn't care if the fight continued or they left or whatever. You got ambushed. They had several other techniques that Francis Marion adopted. One was slicing off small pieces of your enemy. The other was, if your enemy was coming into your territory, you don't confront those armed men. You go around behind. You get their supply wagons, which they did in one case. You get their homesteads. This is where the Long Cane Massacre came from. You go into the heart of the enemy when they are advancing toward you. So, as a result of that, you have to leave at least a quarter of your force back home. The militia in South Carolina had a rule. Everybody from 16 to 45 years old had to be in the militia. But one of the militia rules was 25% of that force never went more than 30 miles from their homes of residence. You had to stay back to guard your home place. So this is another one of the Cherokee techniques. The Cherokees never attacked from 4 sides. They would attack from 3 sides. They did not care if you ran away as they were attacking you. When people are attacked on all different 4 sides, they fight dearly for their lives. They didn't want their enemies to fight dearly for their lives. They wanted their enemies to run away. All of these techniques Francis Marion adopted. Now, he was a regular continental soldier. He was trained to fight in the European mode of fighting. So he had that experience as later on in the Revolutionary War. But that was the experience that Francis Marion picked up in the French and Indian War. So when Revolution began, Francis Marion senior officer William Moultrie. Moultrie was his commanding officer in the French and Indian War, and now they're fighting together again. And the really big fight that happened early on in the Revolutionary War, which, for all intents and purposes, established peace in the state of South Carolina for the next 2.5 years. This was when George Clinton and George Cornwallis wanted to attack Charleston from sea. And the only thing that was keeping the British fleet from the Charleston harbor was a fort that William Moultrie was building on Sullivan's Island. Now this is Sullivan's Island, Fort Moultrie, the Battle of Sullivan's Island, where we had the Palmetto logs that stored the British cannonballs. Now the secret to that was there was a row of Palmetto logs almost 20 feet high. But there was a secondary row of those Palmetto logs 16 feet back. And the entire interior of that was filled with sand. The two natural resources on Sullivan's Island, palmetto trees and sand, that's what was used to build Fort Sumter. It's called Fort Sumter. No, it's called Fort Moultrie. Sorry about that. So, during this battle, when 9 British ships of the line crossed the bar and came into Charleston Harbor, with manning 363 guns of superior weight and size, against the 32 cannons that the Patriots had in Fort Moultrie of various calibers. Now I read that Francis Marion was in charge of the artillery. I've read others accounts saying he wasn't, but he was instrumental in the artillery barrage that the Patriots in Fort Moultrie sent against the 363 cannons of the 9 ships of the British Navy. The British Navy was shot to pieces on that day. Absolutely shot to pieces. And the commander, Peter Parker, an explosion happened from the cannonball coming in. He had a 3-foot-long splinter in his rear end. And the royal governor, William Campbell, was so wounded so seriously, and he was standing right beside Peter Parker, that he died 2 years later from his wounds that he received that day. So the British left with their tail between their legs and sailed back out of Charleston Harbor. And that basically established peace in South Carolina for 2.5 years. The only thing that happened after that primarily was the Cherokee War of 1776, and Francis Marion was not involved in that. The activity was in New York, Philadelphia, and places north. It was so peaceful, so resigned. But also what happened in 1778, December the 30th of that year, that is when Savannah fell. And the British had a toehold in the South now. And that was a major turning point in the war when Savannah fell. And as a result of that, the Patriot forces, now they have joined up with the French because of what happened in Saratoga. Combined, French and American forces are now besieging Savannah. And Francis Marion is right there in the thick of this as a lieutenant colonel in the 2nd South Carolina Continental Line. So the British, they've got their fortifications there in Savannah. The French and the Americans line up to, attack these forces. They've set up a time that they're going to attack the weakest point in the British defenses, which is the Spring Hill Redoubt. And Francis Marion is set to take that point. Now, he had the combination of forces going against the Spring Hill Redoubt, the weakest point in the British line. The night before the battle, one scurrilous individual deserted. And he went to the British and he told them exactly what the plan was. What time the Spring Hill Redoubt was going to be attacked, who was going to attack, how they were going to do it. So that gave the British forces time to double up and triple up their defenses there on the Spring Hill Redoubt. And the next morning, Francis Marion and his troops attacked. And when they did, it was deadly. And Francis Marion lost half his command at that time. So that was a terrible blow. The Spring Hill, the attack on the siege of Savannah created record. These were French. And that left a pretty bad taste in there. That's what happened at Savannah. And the British started building 1,000 men from the north and landed on the north banks of the Edisto River. And they started marching up from Savannah towards Charleston. And Francis Marion was in Charleston, manning the defenses of Charleston with William Moultrie and 5,000 other men. But in March of 1780, Francis Marion, this is when he broke his ankle. There's a story that's been going around. This is not factual, but you'll hear it, you'll read it, that he was at a drinking party, 106 Trabb Street, which the building is still standing. And the host thought it would be a really funny idea to nail the blinds shut all the way around, nail the doors shut, so that everybody would be stuck inside. And that Francis Marion was somewhat of a teetotaler. He didn't want to participate in all this, so he jumped out the second floor window, and that's how he broke his ankle. But that didn't happen, folks. I'm just letting you know. Well, here's another thing. Parson Weems wrote a biography of Francis Marion. Parson Weems is the guy that said George Washington chopped down the cherry tree and all this kind of stuff. I think he's referred to as a hagiographer. I don't exactly know what that means, but it doesn't sound good. But he gives this story, and I think this is typical of Francis Marion, what he may have done. And this is in the French and Indian War, when James Grant and his 1,200-man army was marching through Cherokee territory, and they were up around Franklin, North Carolina, near Ochoe, where Archibald Montgomery had been soundly defeated 18 months earlier. And the reason that Ochoe Pass was such a problem area is because it was so steep on the sides. And one thing about the Cherokees is that they were attacking, if you charged against them, they would retreat. That was how they did it. They would retreat. But in the Ochoe Pass, it was so steep that you couldn't charge uphill and force the Cherokees to retreat, but Francis Marion could. So he took his men and he led them around and flanked the Cherokees, and so they had to break the attack. And James Grant was able to continue his marching through Cherokee territory. So, when Charleston fell, May 12, 1780, 2 months after Francis Marion breaks his ankle, it's absolutely devastating. 2,500 Continental soldiers captured. They're in the prison ships in Charleston Harbor. The 2,500 militiamen, they are told, the June 1st proclamation, if you lay down your arms and you go home, you will be treated as a neutral for the rest of the war. And they took him up on that. Most of the South Carolina militia laid down their arms and they went home. Thomas Sumter laid down his arms. He went home. So, if they left it at that, there's no telling how things would have gone. But on June the 19th, Henry Clinton changed his mind. And he issued a June the 19th proclamation saying, folks, we've kind of changed things here. you do need to pick up your arms. We want you to come back into the field, and you have to fight for the British side. And as soon as that proclamation went out, a firestorm erupted in South Carolina, and different groups of opposition formed. Thomas Sumter up in the Cherokee and the Catawba Indian Reservation had a camp consisting of 1,000 men. Charles McDowell from North Carolina, he had a camp of 350 men of North Carolinians and South Carolinians. Now in the Low Country, there wasn't a lot of organized opposition. There were 4 companies of 50 men each under the command of John James from Williamsburg County. But they were leaderless. And they appealed to Horatio Gates, to appoint them a leader. Well, when Horatio Gates came down to relieve Charleston, he brought his army down. And Thomas Sumter went to him and said, this is great. I need to attack the British supply train, and I can help you out that way. And Gates said, okay, you go ahead, you do that. And Sumter captured the British supply train at Clary's Fort 2 days before the Battle of Camden. Well, Francis Marion went to Gates. And at this time, Francis Marion hobbles up. He's got 18 men with him. Some are black, free blacks, enslaved blacks, other men that just, buddies of him. He hobbles up to, General Gates and said, hey, I'm here to help. What can we do? And Gates looked at him and was like, what is this? He was not impressed. So he says to Marion, okay, well, you go, watch the Santee River. Give me any intelligence that you can get me on what Cornwallis and them are doing. And also gather up all the boats on the north side of the Santee, so when we beat Cornwallis and he's trying to run away, he can't escape across the Santee. So Marion said, okay, well, I'll do that. And so Francis Marion was not in the Battle of Camden. And Camden was a disastrous defeat. The worst defeat, definitely in the South, and just about the worst defeat, the most demoralizing defeat in the American Revolution. So the period that I'm going to be talking about in more detail tonight is the period after Charleston fell, after the Battle of Camden. This is August of 1780 and through 1781. This is the most famous period of Francis Marion's life. And he was so active. He really fought in about 75 battles, which is incredible. And I want to show you this from 1781. This is the 53 battles that he fought in 1781. And look what it takes to create something like this. And this isn't all of it. So I tried a little bit to simplify things to a degree with these battles that occurred 1780 and 1781. And the first battle that Francis Marion was involved in is called the Battle of Great Savannah, which is where Thomas Sumter's house was. So right here is Nelson's Ferry. This is one of the most important spots in South Carolina during the Revolutionary War. The Santee was the biggest river. It was hundreds of yards wide. If you wanted to go across the Santee, you had to go through Nelson's Ferry. If you wanted to go from Charleston to Camden, you had to go through Nelson's Ferry. And Thomas Sumter had his house 4 miles from Nelson's Ferry. And he named it Great Savannah. I told you Thomas Sumter had retired, and he did. But on May the 28th of 1780, which is the day before the Battle wife's house when Tarleton committed his massacres up there. Oh no. A contingent burned because the four walls were standing, or they burned all these surrounding buildings. But they raided Thomas Sumter's house, and they took his wife, who was an invalid. They picked her up in her chair, they took her out, they set her out in the front yard, and she watched her home place being burned to the ground. So, after Camden, Cornwallis had 600 prisoners. And his idea, his plan, was to march them to Charleston, 150 prisoners at a time. So after that battle, he sends 150 men guarded by about 100 soldiers down in Charleston, and they come to Great Savannah, and that's where they camp. And they were so confident in their absolute destruction of any opposition. The soldiers camped inside the house. They stacked their arms on the outside, and the prisoners, I don't know who was guarding them, not very much. So Marion attacked them from two different sides. And he captured all of those British soldiers, and he freed all the 150 prisoners that they had. So, with his 150 prisoners that he released, he says to them, okay, guys, come on, let's join us. And they just looked at him and said, I don't think so. 80 of them said, we're going to stay right here. The British have won. There's no point in us going anywhere. We're going to stay with them. And then 60 of them said, well, we're going to go back to join up with Gates' army. And so they left, going towards Salisbury, and nobody ever saw them again. There was only 3 prisoners from that capture or release of 150. Only 3 of those men joined Marion's forces. Now this tells you how bad the despair was in South Carolina during this time. So that was Francis Marion's first South Carolina victory as a South Carolina militia. He was just a colonel at this time. He was later promoted to general. But this was his first. So, again, there are so many battles. I can't go through all of them, but I will go through some of the most noted ones. And one series of events that was really important is referred to as Marion's Bridges. So one thing about Francis Marion was not at Kings Mountain, was not at Cowpens. But you want to know who else wasn't at Kings Mountain? Mr. Tarleton wasn't at Kings Mountain. Why is that? He was watching Francis Marion. Lord Rowden wasn't at Cowpens. Why is that? He was watching Francis Marion. What was he doing during this time of these battles? He, time after time, Francis Marion had that place 4 times. And it wasn't until the 4th time that he was successful. But after Cowpens, superb victory by the South Carolina militia under General Pickens. Greene takes his army out of South Carolina. Foraging in the American Revolution is so important. And Greene realized that he had to resupply. So he pulled his army out of South Carolina, and he's marching through North Carolina up to Virginia. This is the race to the Dam. And Andrew Pickens is there with him, with the South Carolina militia. They are guarding these 600 prisoners, which was a huge coup. And these prisoners were the 71st Regiment of Foot, which is the best that the British had. So Greene and Pickens and all of this army is moving up into North Carolina. Francis Marion during this time is the only resistance in the state of South Carolina for about 3 months. When Greene went north, he left Francis Marion hanging. And in this, not intentionally, but that's just a matter of figure, figure of speech. So, Lord Rowden, at this time, says, okay, I've had enough of Francis Marion, I'm going to do something about this. So he launches two attacks, two forces towards Francis Marion, wants to catch him in a pincher movement. And he has Lieutenant Colonel John Watson, Tadwell Watson, so we know the British named themselves back then, had him take a force of about 500 men from Fort Watson right here. And we're going to talk about Fort Watson a little bit later on. But from Fort Watson, Colonel Watson takes 500 men and he starts chasing after Francis Marion. And at the same time, Rowden launches a raid from Camden to take the more northern route and hopefully catch Marion, in a pincher movement. So the first encounter that Sumter has with Watson occurs at Waibu Swamp. I think my microphone back at Waibu Swamp right here. And I've really kind of blown this up so we can see. This is Marion's Bridges campaign. And it's tactical brilliance is what it is. So there's a causeway at Waibu Swamp. This low country is full of causeways, a narrow causeway. And Marion and his men and Watson's men both approach each other, see each other over the causeway. There's a shooting fight battle that goes on. And Marion's kind of holding his own when Watson comes up with something that Francis Marion and his men have never seen before. And this is cannons. Watson had 2 3-pound cannons loaded with grape shot. And Marion didn't know what he was facing. And from the other side of the causeway, all of a sudden, these cannons blast through with grape shot, and 6 of Marion's men are killed. So Marion retreated there from the Battle of Waibu Swamp. The next day, they run into each other again. And this is at Mount Hope Swamp. And it's basically the same thing. And so Marion retreats again. And he retreats all the way to the bridge over the Black River. This is the Kingstree Lower Bridge. So Marion is there contesting the crossing, but you don't contest cannons. So the terrain at the Kingstree Lower Bridge is crucial to what happened in this battle. And this is a picture of the Black River at the bridge. This is where the Kingstree Lower Bridge was. And when you're here on the near side, it's nice and level and flat. It's bottomland. But look on the far side. This elevation is 30 feet higher than the other side of the river. And Watson's cannons couldn't depress to blast Marion away. So that they were stymied. They could not get across Kingstree Lower Bridge. They went to a ford a little ways down from the river, and they tried to, set up their cannons there, but Marion's riflemen was so accurate, they started picking off the artillerymen. So they couldn't do that either. So what Watson did was he retreated now. He steps back. He wants to catch his breath. He wants to fight Marion on level ground. And he goes to, let's see, we'll go there. He goes to Blakely's plantation, and then Witherspoon Witherspoon's plantation. So, Witherspoon had a nice plantation. It was cleared around for 200 yards, and he camped his soldiers there. Well, what does Marion do? He surrounds the camp, and with his riflemen, he starts picking off Witherspoon's men one at a time. One of the most famous shots in the Revolutionary War occurred during this time when Lieutenant McCottrell's rifleman, he climbed up a pine tree, and from 300 yards away, he shot Lieutenant Toriano standing on the porch of the Witherspoon plantation. And Lieutenant Toriano was shot in the knee, and of course he was out of the war for the rest of the time. So now, go back to Fort Watson, or does he go to Georgetown? He's halfway in between. He decides that he's going to go to Georgetown, and he breaks out, and he races to Georgetown as best he could, and Marion catches up with him again at Sam Pitt Bridge, and Watson loses 8 more men, and he limps into Georgetown. So in this encounter, in the Bridges campaign, Francis Marion went from Hunt to Dole. Dole is coming from Camden, and this is part of the Pincher movement. And as he's coming down, he's getting closer and closer, and a deserter tells Dole where Francis Marion's secret base is. And this is his camp on Snow Island, which is at the intersection of Petey River and Lynch's Creek. This was Marion's sanctuary. Marion had prisoners here. He had his supplies there. The guard that he left behind were his wounded soldiers, and they couldn't put up much of a fight. And Dole came through and totally decimated that camp and any surrounding Marion supporters that were around. And that was the devastating thing. And Marion went up to North Carolina to regroup after that time. So another campaign that I would like to discuss is what's referred to as the War of Posts. And at this time, Greene has come back into South Carolina. And he is threatening Lord Rawdon at Hobkirk's Hill. But what Greene does is he sends a professional superior force to work with Francis Marion. This is Lee's Legion. When Greene came down, when Washington assigned the job to Nathaniel Greene to help relieve the South in the Southern campaign, George Washington sent the cream of the crop. He sent William Washington, the 3rd Continental Light Dragoons. They're the best of the best. This is the best cavalry that the Patriots have. Except that on equal footing is the Legion of Light Horse Harry Lee. And they were the best of the best. I mean, William Washington and Harry Lee were incredible fighters, incredible assets. Greene sent William Washington to Daniel Morgan. We got cowpens. He sent Light Horse Harry Lee to Francis Marion. And then at this time, the War of the Posts began. And there were numerous British forts throughout the state of South Carolina. One of them was Fort Watson, which I briefly discussed. Another was Fort Mott. I think that mound was built 1,000 years before the Stantees got here. But anyway, what John Colonel Watson did was he blocked off the top 15 feet of this mound. It wasn't a burial mound, it's a ceremonial mound. And on top of this, where you see he had it palisaded all the way around. Now, 6 weeks earlier, Thomas Sumter tried to take this fort, and it was one of Sumter's biggest defeats. Sumter lost several dozen men attacking this fort. And now, 6 weeks later, Lee and Marion are attacking the fort. And they're kind of scratching their heads on this one, folks. I don't mind telling you. Until one of Marion's men came up with a brilliant idea. And this fella is Hezekiah Marion, who was a colonel under Marion. And what Hezekiah Marion proposed and what they did was to build a tower like this. Today, this is referred to as a Marion Tower. So he took the soldiers who were besieging the fort off into the woods, and they started chopping down 6-inch and 8-inch pine trees. And then they cut them to length, and they notched them. And they had everything ready. They had a prefabricated tower that they built out in the woods, hidden from sight from the British forces. And overnight they built this tower. It was, prefabricated. They did it so quiet that they didn't hear it being built. So into that tower, they put their marksmen up, like 4 men up in top with rifles that could shoot down. They could shoot down over the palisades of Fort Watson. And after a few of these guys got wounded and killed, the commander of the fort at that time, he surrendered. So that was a big victory. And the supplies that were at Fort Watson, the gunpowder, the shot, lead, everything that they needed, was a big plus. Next, after that, Francis Marion and Light Horse Harry Lee took Fort Mott, and that was a big victory. So now Greene has had the Battle of Hopkirk's Hill in Camden against Fort Roudan. Greene lost, but Roudan had to retreat. So that was a strategic victory. Now, Greene is at 96, and he sends word for Light Horse Harry Lee to join him. And as far as the War of the Post is concerned, I'll go over this kind of quickly. That's a fascinating subject in and of itself. But Greene next went to Fort... I don't have it up there. Fort Granby. He next went to Fort Granby. He took that. He next went to Fort Galpin on the Savannah River. He took that. Then he went to join Pickens in Augusta, and they together took Fort Grierson and Fort Cornwallis. Now this is all Light Horse Harry Lee. He conquered, captured 6 forts in 6 weeks. And he did every single one of them in a different way. So that's enough on Light Horse Harry Lee for now. But I wanted to just, pass on how things went during that time. So while Greene is occupied with 96, and after that siege is lifted, Greene goes to the high hills of the Santee. Now, this is the most desirable area in the low part of the state. It's 200 feet hills elevated above the surrounding plain. It is cool there. If you're going to spend any spot in South Carolina in the summer of 1780, you want to do it at the high hills of the Santee. So, while Greene is at the high hills, the British, they're in Charleston, and they are foraging. And they have sent out 3 ships from Charleston up the Combahee River. And these ships were part of raiding of the rice plantations on the Combahee River. Now, the British had also sent a force of Hessians and British provincials under the command of Leopold von Borg to assist these ships and protect those ships on the Combahee. Now, where this occurred is down in this area here. And I'm talking about the Battle of Parker's Ferry, which occurred on this road. On the near side is where the Edisto River was. That is where Parker's Ferry was, over the Edisto River. Guarding that ferry were 100 Loyalist militia under the command of our own General Robert Cunningham. Now, all of the official reports and so forth say Cunningham's troops, Cunningham's this, Cunningham that. They never give the first name. And half the accounts that you read will say that it was Bloody Bill Cunningham who was in command of this group. The other half says it was Robert Cunningham, who was the Loyalist general. But we know that it was not Bloody Bill Cunningham there. This battle occurred on August the 30th of 1781. On September the 1st of 1781, we do know that Bloody Bill Cunningham was right here in Lawrence County. And he was attacking Fort Ridgeway on the Murky River. We know that because the British Charleston newspaper describes the Battle of Fort Ridgeway happening on December 1st. And then 2 weeks later, the Savannah Loyalist newspaper gives practically the same account, using the same dates. So Robert Cunningham and 100 men were down here on the near side. Leopold von Borg and 500 men are 5 miles away or so, coming to Parker's Ferry to cross. This is the only way you could get from the Combahee to Charleston. You had to go through Parker's Ferry. Francis Marion knew that. So the local Loyalist Patriot commander was Hardin. And he had about 100 men that he was trying to counteract these raiding parties coming from Charleston. And he sent word to Greene saying, look, man, I'm overwhelmed here. So Greene sent Francis Marion down to help with Hardin. And see, this is 100 miles from the Marion stomping grounds. So Hardin is with von Borg 5 miles down this road. Cunningham at the ferry sends a scouting party down this road just to check things out, maybe 5 men, something like that. And as these men get to about this spot here, they look into the swamp and they see a flash of white. And they yell out, what's the password? And they get no response. So they start shooting. And there was an exchange of gunfire. What those British soldiers saw was a white, and some people say it was a feather, in the hat of one of the militiamen. That was the militiaman's uniform. A white piece of paper. That was it. And otherwise, they're just wearing their homespun. But that white feather started that exchange, and at this point, Francis Marion did have a man killed and others wounded as well. Well, and Marion has been returned fire. and the scouting party skedaddled back to Cunningham's camp. Well, Von Bort, he hears those gunshots, and he thinks it's just Hardin's men, who had been chasing around the whole time. So Von Bort sends his cavalry under Fraser charging down this road, full speed. And as they charge down this road, and they get right here, all of Marion's men, 40 yards deep in the woods, with their rifles and muskets loaded with buckshot, they let loose a volley. And it's an absolute slaughter. And dozens of men, dozens of horses are dead and laying in this road. And they were like that for 3 hours. Marion's men were still in the woods. And at this point, Von Bort brings his artillery up. It took that long to get the artillery to the battlefield. And as they're unlimbering and getting ready to fire, Marion and his men let loose again, and they kill or wound all the artillery. At the Battle of Parker's Ferry, the British forces lost 125 men killed, 80 wounded. And the only reason Marion broke off the attack is he ran out of ammunition. So that was Parker's Ferry. That's the swamp. Here's a schematic of the battle. Cunningham's men. Here's the scouting party. Von Bort's men. Fraser's attack. These are Marion's men. And they just blasted through the whole time. This is the Edisto River. This is where Parker's Ferry was. So, we'll show you this. Parker's Ferry is here. 1 week later, Greene has left the high hills of the Santee, and he's looking for the British force which is out in the field, which is led by Alexander Stewart. Because Lord Rowden, 27-year-old Lord Rowden, in the prime of life, he got malaria, and he had to sail back to England. He had his ship back, but anyway. Greene is chasing after Stewart now. And Greene leaves the high hills of the Santee, going after Stewart. Marion, at this time, has joined up with the Continental Army and Nathaniel Greene. So this is a totally different situation. Now you're in, regular ranks, European-style warfare, if you will. Very different from ambushing at Parker's Ferry. So this is how the Battle of Eutaw Springs was laid out. And what Nathaniel Greene is doing here is utilizing some of Daniel Morgan's tactics. Daniel Morgan's tactics at Cowpens were just superb, fantastic. Taught at West Point to this day. Daniel Morgan had defense in depth. He had 3 lines of defense. He had the South Carolina militia in the front line. He had the Continental Army in the second line. He had William Washington and the mounted militia in the third line. And that was very effective. That won Cowpens. And Greene utilized that same strategy at Guilford Courthouse, and he did very well. And now here we are at Eutaw Springs, and Greene has his militia in the front line. He's got this Pickens and the Little River Regiment, and the 96th Regiment rather, commanding the left wing of the Patriot militia. He's got Durant who's a French officer commanding the North Carolina militia. And then here's Francis Marion commanding his militia here, front line at Utah Springs. Now, Francis Marion is senior to Pickett's. Francis Marion is in charge of the militia line, the South Carolina militia line. Second line is the Continentals, 1st and 2nd Maryland Regiment, and Kirkwood's Delawareans. And there's some Virginia Continentals as well. So, and the cavalry in the 3rd line. And William Washington is on the left wing. Light Horse Harry Lee is in the right wing. But Greene is not utilizing defense in depth at Utah Springs. What Greene has set up here is offense in depth. Never before has an army attacked with the militia in the front. The militia's first. They're the ones taking the brunt of the attack of the British, the 63rd Regiment of Foot, highly regarded, very, very professional. British Legion is here. What we're looking at here is the maturation of the South Carolina infantry, militia infantry. So, I have so many things to say about positive things to say about the South Carolina militia. But I think there's one thing that says it all. And that is the South Carolina militia, in any battle, they never ran. They never ran. And that's why they're confident, because militia was not professional, experienced fighters. They were farm boys. And what we have here is farm boys exchanging gunfire with, again, the best of the British, that they have to offer. At this point, because they're with the Continental Army, Greene has plenty of muskets. All of these men are armed with muskets. They're armed with muskets and cartridge boxes. Cartridge boxes that contain 16 rounds, plus the 1 round that's in their musket. So a total of 17. They expended all their information, all their ammunition. 16 shots were exchanged back and forth. And this was a back and forth battle. It was intensive. There were tremendous casualties here. The British lost 33% of their force. The Patriots lost 25% of their force. And those are devastating losses. But shot after shot after shot was fired back and forth and back and forth. The terrain was slightly wooded. Towards the end of the battle, the North Carolina militia did break, and they started to, retreat. But the 1st Maryland Continental line came in and plugged that down, and the Patriot forces advanced. Major John Marchbanks for the British, he was a British regular. He held the brick house that was on that plantation. He saved the day for the British. But the camp was totally overrun by the Patriot forces. And the British were just fleeing from the battlefield, except for Marchbanks that was holding firm. So what did the British have in their camps? They got shot, they got powder, they got tents, and they got clothes, and they got rum. And the winning Patriot forces snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Because they were too drunk to fight. They were too drunk to fight. So, technically, the British won that battle. But tactically, because Stuart had to retreat all the way into confines of Charleston, and they stayed there for the next 17 months. This is the battlefield at Utah Springs, part of it. Most of it is under Lake Marion. And this is the final resting place of South Carolina's most famous hero. After the war, Francis Marion was very active in state politics. You know, I say several times that we weren't fighting for freedom, we weren't fighting for liberty. We were fighting for self-determination. And one of the primary reasons I say that is because all of these generals that I'm discussing, the colonels and everybody else, they are the ones that went into the new government under our Constitution. They are the ones that made our state laws. They are the ones that were determining for themselves what the laws were going to be, not some dictate from some guy in London that was never set foot in the Western Hemisphere. So Francis Marion was one of these military legislatures, and we're so thankful to him for that. But this is his final resting place. I will tell you that Francis Marion married after the war. He was 53 years old when he married. He never had no children. He married his first cousin. She was 49. But I'm sure they lived happily ever after. So that's it as far as my discussion of Francis Marion. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Yes.
Saw a tacky horse at Camden last weekend.
Yes, he was. Francis Marion was famous for the South Carolina tacky horses, which were small horses with big feet, and they could maneuver through the swamps at ease. Well, if nobody else has any questions, I guess it's time to go home. No?
Yeah. Thank you. And she's here to present something.
Can you hear me?
No,
Can you hear me now?
that's better.
I'm delighted to be here this evening. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to try to read this so I don't make too many mistakes. With the upcoming 250 anniversary, and we call it the Sesquicentennial, several Behalton Butler chapter members became interested in learning about the Revolutionary War in South Carolina, especially the upstate. We have been wonderfully surprised to have found a gallant gentleman, Mr. Durrant Ashmore, giving regular revolutionary lectures and battlefield walks in our area. Excuse me. In addition to these lectures and walks, Mr. Ashmore is also the caretaker of several sites and battlefields in Lawrence and Greenville counties for the South Carolina Battlefield Preservation Trust. As such, he has followed the searches for and archaeological studies of those battlefields so that he can share that knowledge during his lectures. He proactively proposed improvements or additions to battlefields, and in some cases, he has volunteered the resources of his landscaping company to help those out. In other cases, he has developed relationships with private owners to gain occasional access to these properties, these battlefields that are on private property that we cannot get on unless the owners allow us to get on there. Thank you. We have 6 sites near Lawrence County for which Mr. Ashmore is the caretaker or the point of contact for the owners, and there's a seventh one, which is in Greenville County. First, we have Hammond's Old Store. Mr. Ashmore personally purchased a plot of land adjoining for access and future displays. And I can tell you this is a really interesting battlefield because it has a great view of the Colonial Road. And I've been there, I walked on it, and it's really neat. Massacre. This is Rosemont Plantation. This is the home of Anne Pamela Cunningham, who founded the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And I'll tell you, if it weren't for those ladies, Mount Vernon would not be preserved, because with the DAR, they worked and they preserved Mount Vernon so that we can go and enjoy it as it is today. And then the last one, which is in Greenville County, is the Battle of the Great Canebrake on private property. And we know that property is Hopkins Farm. And it's a great, great piece of property. Mr. Ashmore is currently restoring a grove of pecan trees which were planted 100 years after that battle. He's replenishing as many as he can. How many have you replanted already?
Well, about 10, but the beavers have eaten 4 of them. I got a lot of obstacles there.
And as we go, out of the commemoration of the battle every year, he speaks at that commemoration. And I'll tell you right now, that is really worth going to because it's so interesting and so great. And it's right there on the Hopkins Farm where the battle happened. In addition, he helped restore the grave stones of John Thomas and Jane Black Thomas after they were damaged. We have attended his walks and lectures at most of these sites, and also at Cowpens, Kings Mountain, 96, Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, and sites near Spartanburg, the Cedar Springs, Gallons Ford, Earls Ford, Shallow Church, Fort Prince, and sites in western North Carolina, Bickerstaff's Hanging Tree, Gilbert Town, the Battle of Cane Creek, and Quaker Meadows in Morganton, and sites of the Cherokee War of 1776 in Pickens and Oconee counties, Seneca, Fort Rutledge, and Tomasi, where the thrilling ring fight took place. We truly appreciate Mr. Ashmore and his efforts to find, preserve, and improve important smaller battlefields in Lawrence and Greenville counties, and to share his knowledge of those general Revolutionary War history with the public. Our community is truly blessed by Mr. Ashmore's willingness to volunteer his time so that the public can better understand the Revolutionary War in our area and honor the men and women who took part in these conflicts. We understand that he's been doing this for about 10 years. And has been increasing his efforts with the upcoming 250th anniversary. We would like to honor Mr. Ashmore's efforts with the National Daughters of the American Revolution Historic Preservation Recognition Award. We are pleased that the award includes a lovely pen. And you know, in VAR, we're all about pens. Durant, it gives me great pleasure to present this award to you because I don't think anybody deserves it any more than you do. We have this beautiful plaque for you. And I'll give it to you.
goodness. Thank you. Wow.
We couldn't be more pleased with this evening, the way it's turned out. All these people who came to congratulate you and honor you.
Thank you, Lord. I appreciate it. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate having all of you here tonight. And I get a lot of inspiration from you folks. I think you know that. And y'all actually pay attention. I'm going. But I just want to thank all of y'all because I know how supportive you are. And I could not do this without your support.
We call ourselves Durant's groupies.
Hear, hear.
We can keep some things a secret. But, anyway, the support that we're getting from the Lawrence County 250 Committee is superb. The support that we're getting from the Daughters of the American Revolution is superb. And the support we're getting from the Sons of the American Revolution and the Sons of the Revolution, it's very encouraging the way the interactions and the responses that I get from all of y'all. So this is great, and I tell you, I certainly do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.